Tonight is episode 2 of our journey through the Dhammapada. Last time we spent some quiet hours with the chapter called The Mind. We met the Fletcher who straightened arrows with patience. We met the fish out of water. We sat with the recognition that the wandering mind is not a broken mind, that it is simply a mind doing what minds do. And we stayed with that recognition, the way you stay with a difficult guest, not fighting, not agreeing, just being there until the guest grows tired. Tonight we go further. The Dhammapada has 26 small chapters, each one a quiet doorway into a different part of the Buddha's understanding. Tonight we are going to step through 2 of those doorways at the same time. The chapter called The Fool and the chapter called The Wise One. The Buddha placed these 2 chapters side by side. They sit next to each other in the book the way 2 neighbors might sit on opposite sides of a thin wall. One lives mostly in the dark, one lives mostly in the light, and the wall between them is much thinner than either of them knows. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from tonight. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism or about the Dhammapada to be here. You do not need to have heard episode 1. The Buddha taught simply. He looked at the way people lived. He looked at the way people suffered. And he described what he saw with great care and great kindness. That is what these verses do tonight. They describe, they do not demand. They hold up a mirror and let us look. Tonight the mirror shows us something we all carry but rarely examine. The question of what kind of person we are becoming. Not the person we show to the world. Not the person we wish we were. The person we are slowly, quietly in the choices we barely notice making, turning into. The Dhammapada says there are 2 directions a person can go. One it calls the fool. The other it calls the wise one. And the distance between them, as we will see tonight, is not what you might expect. It is not an ocean. It is not a lifetime. It is something much smaller than that. It is a single moment of seeing clearly. Take a slow, deep breath. Wherever you are, let yourself settle in. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. People often assume that the Dhammapada begins each chapter with something grand. A sweeping declaration, a dramatic opening. But the chapter on fools begins with something very small. Something you already know. Something you may be experiencing right now, at this very moment, in this very bed. The verse goes like this. Long is the night to the sleepless. Long is the road to the weary. Long is the cycle of suffering to the foolish who do not know the truth. Long is the night to the sleepless. If you are listening to this at midnight, or at 1 in the morning, or at that strange nameless hour between 2 and 4, when the world seems to have forgotten you exist, then you already know what the Buddha is talking about. You do not need anyone to explain it to you. Your body knows. Your ceiling knows. The clock on the wall that moves so slowly it seems to be mocking you knows. There is a particular cruelty to a sleepless night that people who sleep well do not fully understand. It is not just the tiredness. It is the loneliness of it. The sense of being the only person awake in a world that has gone quiet. Everyone else has been collected by sleep, gathered up, carried away. And you are still here, still awake, still thinking, still lying in the dark with a mind that has decided, for reasons of its own, that tonight is not for resting. Tonight is for thinking about everything you did wrong this week, or everything that might go wrong next week. Or that one conversation from 3 years ago that you still have not finished inside your head. Long is the night to the sleepless. The Buddha was not being poetic when he said this. He was being precise. He was naming a sensation that every human being in every century has known. The night that will not end. The hours that seem to have been poured from a jar that has no bottom. The darkness that does not thin no matter how long you wait. But listen to what the verse does next. It does not stop with the night. It says long is the road to the weary. This is a different kind of long. The first long is about time, about hours that stretch. This long is about distance, about a road that seems to go on forever. The weary traveler does not look at the clock. He looks at the road ahead, and the road stretches out in a way that makes him want to sit down right where he is and stop walking altogether. Most of us know this kind of long too. Not on a physical road, but in a life, the long stretch of a difficult season that will not end. The long years of a job that does not fit but that pays the bills. The long patience required to raise children who do not yet appreciate what you are giving them. The long recovery from something that broke you and that you are still, years later, slowly putting back together. The long middle of anything, when the beginning is too far behind to remember and the end is too far ahead to imagine, and you are just here, in the middle, putting one foot in front of the other, because there is nothing else to do. The Buddha places these two kinds of long next to each other, because they belong together. And then he adds a third. Long is the cycle of suffering to the foolish who do not know the truth. This third long is the longest of all. It is not one night. It is not one road. It is an entire life spent going around the same circles without understanding why the circles keep repeating, why the same arguments keep happening, why the same mistakes keep being made, why the same thoughts keep arriving at the same hour in the same bed in the same darkness, night after night after night. Now the word the verse uses here is important, and it requires some care. The verse says the foolish. In English, this sounds like an insult. It sounds like the Buddha is calling someone stupid, and that he is about to lecture them about their stupidity. But the Pali word is bala, and bala does not mean stupid. It does not mean unintelligent. It does not mean morally bad. Bala means someone who has not yet seen clearly. Someone who is still doing things that cause themselves suffering, not because they are cruel or careless, but because they have not yet looked carefully enough at what they are doing. A bala is not a villain. A bala is a sleeper, someone who has not woken up yet. And the Buddha, who spent his entire teaching life gently waking people up, does not condemn sleepers. He understands them. He was one of them once, we all are. The verse is not a punishment. It is a diagnosis. And like any good diagnosis, it carries inside it the beginning of a cure. Because if the night is long, because we have not seen clearly, then the cure is not a sleeping pill. The cure is not a technique to force the eyes shut. The cure is sight. The cure is seeing. And seeing, the Buddha taught over and over, can begin at any moment. Even this one, even tonight. Even lying in the dark at an hour when nothing seems possible. There was once a man who had been walking for a very long time. He had set out from his village many weeks earlier with a purpose that had seemed clear to him then. He was going to a city in the south, where he had been offered work. Good work, honest work, work that would allow him to send money home to his family, and perhaps, over time, to build a better house for his children. He had planned the journey carefully. He had packed food for 2 weeks. He had a blanket. He had a pair of sandals that his wife had repaired the night before he left, sitting by the lamp, stitching the leather with a concentration he had noticed, and almost said something about. He had almost told her that he saw the care she was taking, but the moment had passed, the way such moments do, and now she was many days behind him, and the road was many days ahead, and the thing he had not said sat somewhere in his chest like a small stone he could not quite reach. By the 3rd week, the walking had become something other than walking. It had become a kind of argument with distance itself. Each morning he would rise, roll his blanket, eat a little of whatever he had left, and begin again. And each morning the road looked the same dust, the same hills in the distance that never seemed to come any closer, the same sun that rose behind him and set ahead of him, as if the world itself were conspiring to keep him in the middle of things. He began to talk to himself, not out loud inside. He would replay conversations from his village. He would imagine the conversations he would have when he arrived in the city. He would worry about the money running out. He would worry about his children getting sick. He would wonder whether the work would still be there when he arrived, or whether someone else had taken it. He would wonder whether he was a fool for leaving in the first place, whether his wife was angry with him, whether his children had already started to forget what he looked like. The wondering was louder than the walking. By the time the sun went down each day, his feet had carried him perhaps 15 miles, but his mind had traveled much further. It had been to his village and back a dozen times. It had been to the city and back. It had been to futures that did not exist, and pasts that could not be changed, and conversations with people who were not there. The mind, he began to realize, was the real traveler. And the mind was completely, hopelessly lost. One evening at a small roadside shelter, where travelers sometimes stopped for the night, he met an old woman who was also traveling. She was going in the opposite direction. She was small and bent with age and carried almost nothing, just a cloth bag and a wooden cup. She moved slowly, but she did not seem tired. There was something about her face he could not quite name. It was not calm exactly. It was more like the face of someone who was not in any hurry. Someone who had nowhere she needed to be except where she was. They shared the shelter that night. The man built a fire. The old woman sat across from it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. The road outside was empty and dark. The stars came out. Eventually the man said, almost to himself, as if he had been thinking it for hours, and the words had simply leaked out, "I have been walking for 3 weeks." The old woman looked at him. She did not seem surprised by the remark. She sipped from her wooden cup. She asked, "To the city in the south. And where are you now?" He looked around the shelter. "Here." "No," she said gently. "Where are you now?" "Not on the road in yourself." The man did not understand the question. He frowned. He opened his mouth to answer, and then closed it again, because he realized he did not know what to say. The old woman smiled. It was a patient smile. The smile of someone who had asked this question before, and was used to the silence that followed it. "You told me you feel further from your destination than when you started," she said, "but you have been walking toward the city every day. Your feet have done the right thing every morning for 3 weeks." The man was quiet. He knew she was right. He could feel the rightness of it in his body. But he did not know what to do with the knowing. "Your body," she said, "is on this road. It has been on this road since you left your village. It has walked every mile. It has slept under every sky. But your mind has been on a different road. Your mind has been going back to your village and forward to the city and sideways into worries and backward, into regrets and around it, circles that have no beginning and no end. Your mind has been traveling in every direction except the one your feet are going. And when the mind travels in circles, while the body travels in a line, everything feels long. The night feels long. The road feels long." The man asked. The old woman laughed quietly. It was a small, dry laugh, the laugh of someone who has earned the right to find things funny. "Because I walk the same road you are walking," she said. "Not this road. My own road a long time ago." "What was that?" She pointed at the ground beneath her feet. "To be here," she said. "Not there, not tomorrow. Not yesterday, not in the city. Not in the village. Here where the feet are. Where the fire is. Where the night is happening right now. Not somewhere else." When I stopped traveling ahead of myself and behind myself and around myself and finally came back to where I actually was, the road became a different road. The same dust, the same hills. But I was finally on it. The man sat with this for a long time. The fire burned lower. The stars shifted. He did not fully understand what the old woman had said, but he felt something in it that was true. Something that had to do with the way he had been living inside his own head for 3 weeks. The way his mind had made the road longer than the road actually was. The way the night felt long because he was never quite in it. He was always somewhere else. The next morning, the old woman was already gone when he woke. He rolled his blanket. He ate a little. He stood up, he looked at the road. And this time, for the first few hundred steps at least, he tried something different. He tried to be where his feet were. He noticed the dust. He noticed the way the morning air felt against his face, cool and slightly damp. He noticed the weight of his pack on his shoulders. He noticed the sound of his own footsteps on the packed earth. He noticed a bird calling somewhere in the trees to his left, a sound he had been walking past for days without hearing. The road was the same road, but for a few minutes, it did not feel as long. The man on the road had been doing what most of us do every night. His body was in one place and his mind was in many places, and the distance between the two is what made everything feel long. The verse says, "Long is the night to the sleepless," but the sleeplessness it describes is not really about the body failing to sleep. It is about the mind failing to be where the body is. The body is in bed. The mind is at tomorrow's meeting. The body is under the blanket. The mind is replaying last Tuesday. The body is breathing slowly, doing exactly what it should be doing. And the mind is 3 towns away, calculating whether there is enough money in the account. This gap between body and mind is what the verse is pointing at. And it is pointing at it not to blame us, not to add another failure to the list, but to help us see it clearly enough that we might, on some night, begin to close it. In a village at the edge of a wheat field, there lived 2 sisters. They were not young and not old. Perhaps in their late 30s, they had grown up in the same house, eaten the same meals, heard the same stories from the same grandmother, walked the same paths to the same river to wash the same clothes. They had shared a childhood so closely that sometimes, even now, they finished each other's sentences without noticing. And yet they had become, over the years, 2 very different people. Different in the way that mattered most. The way that showed itself only at night. The older sister was a warrior. She had always been a warrior, even as a child. But the worrying had deepened with age, the way a riverbed deepens with years of water running through it. She worried about the crops. She worried about her children's health. She worried about the price of grain, and the weather, and the state of the roof, and whether her husband was satisfied with the life they had built together. She was a good woman. Everyone in the village knew it. She worked harder than almost anyone. She was generous, she was kind. But at night, when the work was done, and the house was quiet, and the children were sleeping, and her husband's breathing had slowed beside her, her mind began its rounds. It went from worry to worry the way a guard walks from post to post in the dark, checking each lock, rattling each gate, never quite satisfied that everything is secure. She slept poorly. She had slept poorly for as long as she could remember. The mornings came too soon and too tired. She moved through her days with the particular weariness of someone who has not rested well in years. The kind of weariness that sits behind the eyes and makes the whole world feel slightly heavier than it should be. The younger sister was different. Not because her life was easier. It was not she had the same crops, the same weather, the same children getting sick in the same seasons. She had her own difficulties that the older sister did not have. Her husband had died young, perhaps 5 years into their marriage, and she had raised her children alone for many years. She had carried losses the older sister had not carried. She knew grief in a way the older sister did not, and yet she slept well. She had always slept well, not because nothing troubled her. Things troubled her. But when the night came, and the house grew quiet, and the children were finally in their beds, and the dark settled over the village, something in her settled too. Something came down, the way a bird comes down to its branch at the end of the day. She lay down, she breathed, and in a few minutes she was gone. The older sister had noticed this for years, and it baffled her. How could a woman who had lost more, who had carried more, who had more reason to lie awake, sleep so easily? It seemed unfair. It seemed like a secret the younger sister was keeping from her. One afternoon, while they were hanging laundry together in the yard behind the older sister's house, the sun warm on their shoulders, the sheets snapping in the wind, the older sister finally asked. She said, "How do you sleep the way you do? You have had a harder life than mine. You lost Arjun, you raised the children alone. You have carried things I have never had to carry. And yet every night you close your eyes and you are gone inside of 5 minutes. I lie there for hours. Some nights I do not sleep at all." The younger sister did not answer right away. She hung a shirt on the line. She smoothed it with her hand, pressing out the wrinkles with her palm. She was not someone who answered quickly. She had learned, in the years after her husband's death, that the truest things usually needed a few extra seconds to find their way to the surface. "I think," she said slowly, "it is because I do not take the day to bed with me." The older sister waited. "When evening comes," the younger sister said, "after the children are in bed and the house is quiet, I have a small habit. I do not think of it as anything special. It is not a practice or a meditation or a technique. It is just something I have done for many years. Since Arjun died and I was alone for the first time and the nights were very hard. Every evening I sit on the step outside the back door, just for a few minutes. I do not do anything out there. I just sit, and while I am sitting, I let the day go, not the memories. I keep the memories. They are mine and I want them. But the weight of the day, the decisions I made, the things I said that I am not sure about, the things I did not say, the worry about tomorrow, I let all of that slide off me. Like water off a pot when you turn it upside down. I do not hold any of it," said the older sister. "And then I go inside and I lie down and the bed is just a bed. It is not a courtroom. It is not a planning room. It is not the room where the day continues under a different name. It is just a bed." The older sister was quiet for a long time. She finished hanging the laundry. She stood in the yard with the wet smell of the sheets and the sound of the chickens scratching in the dirt and the afternoon light coming through the branches of the old tamarind tree. "I have never let the day go," she said finally. "Not once I carry it into the bed with me. I carry it into the dark. I carry the whole day and yesterday's day and last week's day. And sometimes days from years ago that should have been finished a long time ago." Her younger sister nodded. "They always do," she said. "Things get heavier in the dark." That night, the older sister tried something she had never tried before. After the children were asleep and her husband was reading by the lamp, she went to the back step. She sat down. The evening was cool. She could hear the crickets and the distant sound of the river moving past the edge of the village. She did not know what she was supposed to feel. She did not know if she was doing it right. The worries came immediately. The crops, the money, the children, the roof. They came the way they always came, like guards reporting for duty, lined up and ready for inspection. But instead of picking each one up and examining it, the way she usually did, turning it over in her hands, checking it for new angles of failure, she tried to let them pass. She imagined them as water. She imagined the pot tipping. She imagined the weight sliding off the round surface and running into the ground beneath her feet. It did not work perfectly. Some of the worries stuck. The roof stuck, the money stuck. They did not want to slide. They had been sitting on her shoulders for so long they had worn grooves into her, and they settled back into those grooves, the way a wheel settles into a rut in a muddy road. But a few of the smaller worries, the ones she had been carrying so long she had forgotten they were there, the ones that had become part of the background noise of her mind, those fell away. And the shoulders, she noticed with surprise, came down a little. Not a lot, just a little, just enough to notice. She went inside. She lay down beside her husband. The bed felt slightly different. Not transformed. Not magical, just slightly lighter. Slightly more like a place to rest and slightly less like a place to work. She slept that night. Not perfectly, not the way her sister slept, but more than she had slept in many weeks. And the night, for the first time in a very long time, did not feel quite as long. The two sisters lived the same life in the same village with the same difficulties. The difference between them was not circumstance. It was not temperament. It was not luck or strength or any quality that one of them had been born with and the other had not. The difference was a small habit, a habit so small it barely counted as a habit at all. Sitting on a step for a few minutes after the day was done, letting the weight slide off, turning the pot upside down. The older sister had been carrying every day into every night for years. The days accumulated. They stacked up inside her like stones in a jar. And every night, when she lay down with the full weight of every unfinished thing, every unsaid word, every unresolved worry she had ever had. No wonder the nights were long. She was not just carrying tonight. She was carrying every night she had ever failed to put down. The younger sister carried the same days. She had the same worries, the same unfinished things, the same imperfect conversations. But she set them down each evening. She let them go, not by forgetting, not by pretending they did not matter, by simply choosing each evening not to take them to bed. The memories stayed. The love stayed. The weight went into the ground. This is what the verse is telling us about the long night. The night is long not because the night is long. The night is long because we bring so much into it. We bring the whole day. We bring yesterday. We bring last month. We bring a conversation from 3 years ago that still has not finished inside our heads. We bring the weight of things that cannot be changed, and things that have not yet happened, and things that may never happen at all. We pile them on the bed. We pull the covers over them, and then we wonder why there is no room for sleep. Tonight, if you are willing, you can try what the younger sister did. You do not have to go sit on a step. You are already lying down. But you can right here in the dark. Imagine the pot tipping. Imagine the day sliding off you. The things you said today. The things you did not say. The decision you are not sure about. The worry about tomorrow that keeps circling like a dog that cannot find a comfortable place to lie down. Let it slide, let it go into the ground beneath the bed. The ground will hold it. The ground is very good at holding things. It has been holding things for a very long time. The day will be there in the morning if you need it. Nothing is lost by setting it down for a few hours. The worries will not dissolve overnight. The problems will not be solved by the time you wake. But you will be rested. An rested person solves problems better than a tired one. A rested person sees more clearly. A rested person is kinder to others and to herself. So tonight, just one thing. Choose one weight from today. Just one. It does not have to be the heaviest. It can be small. A conversation that went sideways. A task that did not get done. A worry about someone you love. Hold it in your mind for a moment. Acknowledge it. It is real. It matters. And now let it go. Not forever, just for tonight. Imagine it sliding off you, the way water slides off a pot when the pot is turned upside down. Feel the shoulders come down with it, even just a little, even just enough to notice. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice whether anything has shifted, even slightly in the chest or the shoulders or the jaw. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a verse that comes a little further into the chapter on fools that has puzzled people for a very long time. It is short, it sounds simple. But the more you sit with it, the more it opens. The way a door opens into a room you did not know was behind the wall. The verse goes like this. A fool who knows his foolishness is wise, at least to that extent. But a fool who thinks himself wise is a fool indeed. Read that again slowly in your mind. A fool who knows his foolishness is wise. A fool who thinks himself wise is a fool indeed. The Buddha is doing something unusual here. He is not dividing the world into two categories, fools on one side and wise people on the other. the way a teacher might divide a classroom into those who passed and those who failed. He is dividing fools into two kinds, and he is saying that one kind of fool is already on the road to wisdom, while the other kind is stuck so deeply in his foolishness that he cannot even see the road exists. This is not the way most people think about the matter. Most people think that a fool is a fool. That foolishness is a fixed condition, like being tall or short. That you either know the truth or you do not, that the line between ignorance and wisdom is sharp and clear, and you are on one side or the other. The Buddha sees it differently. The Buddha sees a spectrum, and on that spectrum, the most important point is not the far end where perfect wisdom lives. The most important point is the one just barely past the beginning. The point where a person who has been asleep their whole life opens one eye. The point where the fool looks at his own foolishness and says, quietly, without drama, without performance, "Yes, I see it, I see what I have been doing. I do not know how to stop yet, but I see it." That seeing, the Buddha says, is itself a kind of wisdom. Not the finished kind. Not the kind that leads to immediate transformation, but the seed kind. The beginning kind, the kind that if it is not buried under shame or denial or the frantic effort to fix everything at once, will eventually grow into something that changes the shape of a life. The fool who thinks himself wise has no such seed. He has built a wall around his foolishness and called it intelligence. He has constructed a story about himself, a careful, well-maintained, internally consistent story, in which everything he does makes sense, in which every choice was the right one, in which every mistake was someone else's fault, or not really a mistake at all, but a strategy that simply has not paid off yet. The wall is thick. The story is convincing, and behind the wall, in the dark, the foolishness continues, unexamined, unchallenged, uninterrupted. This is the harder kind of foolishness, not because the person is worse, not because the person is more selfish or more stubborn, but because the person cannot see. The wall is in the way. The story is in the way, and the most dangerous thing about a wall you have built yourself is that after a while, you forget it is a wall. You think it is the world. Most of us, when we first hear this verse, immediately think of someone we know. Someone at work who is clearly wrong about something, but who will never, under any circumstances, admit it. Someone in the family who has been doing the same destructive thing for 20 years, and who has an explanation for why it is everyone else's problem. Someone on the internet who is so wrapped in their own certainty that no evidence, no argument, no appeal to their better nature will ever reach them. But the verse is not about someone else. The verse is about us. It is always about us. That is what the Dhammapada does. It holds up a mirror, and the mirror does not show us the person we think we are. It shows us the person we actually are. We all have walls. We all have stories. We all have parts of our lives where we have decided, perhaps a long time ago, that we already know enough. Where we have stopped looking. Where the door has been locked for so long that we have forgotten it was ever a door. We have mortared over it. We have hung a painting in front of it. We have arranged the furniture so that no one, including ourselves, can see where the door used to be. There is a story connected to this verse that the commentaries preserve. The Buddha spoke these words after an encounter with two men who had come to hear him teach. The two men arrived together on the same afternoon. They were not monks. They were laypeople from a nearby town. They had heard that the Buddha was teaching in a grove of trees just outside their town, and they had come to listen, the way people sometimes come to hear a speaker whose reputation has reached them. The first man came with an open mind. He did not have strong opinions about the Buddha. He did not have strong opinions about anything. Really, he was simply curious. He had heard that this teacher said things that were worth hearing, and he wanted to hear them for himself. He came the way you might come to a well when you are thirsty, not because you know what the water will taste like, but because you are thirsty. But the first man had a secret he carried. He was not a respectable citizen. He made his living as a pickpocket. He worked the markets and the festivals, slipping his hand into bags and pouches, while their owners were distracted by the noise and the color. He was good at it. He had been doing it for years. And he was not proud of it. He did not think of himself as a clever man who had found an easy path through life. He thought of himself as a thief. He knew what he was. He had known for a long time. He had tried to stop many times. The way a man tries to stop drinking or gambling or any of the things we do that we know we should not do. He had tried and failed and tried and failed, and eventually he had stopped trying and had simply continued, carrying the knowledge of his own dishonesty, the way a man carries a stone in his pocket. Always aware of its weight, always aware of its presence, never quite able to set it down. The second man came with a different attitude entirely. He was a merchant. He ran a successful business. He was well known in the town as a man of substance and integrity. He gave generously to the poor. He attended every religious gathering. He sat in the front row. He nodded at the right moments. He was a man who thought of himself and was thought of by the town as a good man, a wise man, a man who had figured things out. He came to hear the Buddha, not because he thought he needed to learn something, but because it seemed like the sort of thing a man of his standing would do. They sat side by side in the grove. The afternoon light came through the leaves. The Buddha began to speak. He spoke quietly, the way he always did, without raising his voice, without dramatic gestures, without any of the theatrical urgency that other teachers use to hold their audiences. He simply spoke. He spoke about the mind, about the way we carry habits without seeing them, about the way we build walls around the things we do not want to look at, about the possibility, always present, always available, of beginning to see clearly. The pickpocket listened. He listened the way a thirsty man drinks water, with his whole body, without reservation, without the part of the mind that stands back and evaluates and decides whether this is worth his time. He listened because he was desperate. He knew he was doing wrong. He knew he was a fool. He knew the stone in his pocket was getting heavier every year. And something in the Buddha's words landed in the exact place where that knowing lived. The words found the crack in his wall, the crack he had never been able to seal, the crack of his own painful honesty about himself. And through that crack, the teaching entered him the way water enters a root. Quietly, completely. Without asking permission. By the end of the afternoon, something had changed in the pickpocket. The commentaries say he attained the first stage of awakening. This is a technical term in Buddhism, but what it means, in plain language, is that the man saw something he had not seen before. He saw himself clearly. He saw his own foolishness without the wall around it. And the seeing was not a punishment. It was a relief. The merchant listened too. But he listened differently. He listened the way a man at a dinner party listens to a speech that is being given in his honor. Approvingly, pleasantly, with the comfortable feeling of a person who already knows everything that is being said, and is simply glad to hear it confirmed by someone else. Yes, he thought, this is very good. This is very wise. I am glad I came. This is exactly what I have always believed. How nice to hear someone say it so well. But nothing landed. The words touched the surface of him and slid off, the way rain slides off a stone that has been polished smooth. Not because the words were weak. Not because the teaching was unclear. Because there was no crack. The merchant had no crack. He had sealed every possible opening years ago, with the mortar of his own good opinion of himself. The wall was perfect. Nothing could get in. And nothing did. When the teaching was over, the two men walked home together through the cooling afternoon. The merchant was in good spirits. He talked about the Buddha's ideas with the ease and confidence of a man who has understood everything and is now ready to explain it to others. He praised the teaching. He analyzed its strengths. He compared it favorably to other teachers he had heard. The pickpocket said nothing. He walked beside the merchant in silence. He carried what he had heard inside him the way you carry a live coal in your hand, carefully aware that it is hot, aware that it is changing you, not yet sure what you will become when the burning is finished. When this was later reported to the Buddha, he spoke the verse we have been sitting with tonight. A fool who knows his foolishness is wise at least to that extent. But a fool who thinks himself wise is a fool indeed. The pickpocket was the first kind of fool. The fool who knows. He knew he was a thief. He knew he was doing wrong. He had never been able to close the crack. And that crack, that painful, inconvenient, persistent crack, was the door through which his entire life changed. The merchant was the second kind. The fool who does not know. Who has decided long ago that he already knows. Who has built a wall so smooth and so complete that the teaching slides off it like rain off stone. Who walks home from the most important afternoon of his life and notices nothing. Who explains the teaching to others without ever having been touched by it himself. There is something about the night that makes us more like the pickpocket than the merchant. In the daytime we can maintain the wall. We can keep the performance going. We can be the person we have decided we are, the person who has it figured out, the person who does not need to change. But at night, in the dark, with no audience and no script and no one to perform for, the wall gets thinner. The cracks show. The things we have been keeping on the other side of the wall come closer. We can hear them. We can feel their weight. We can feel the stone in the pocket. This is not a bad thing. This is the verse's gift. The night, for all its difficulty, for all its length, for all its loneliness, is the time when we are most honest with ourselves. The time when the walls are thinnest. The time when the fool who knows his foolishness is closest to wisdom, not because the night teaches us anything new, because the night strips away the performance. And what is left, when the performance is gone, is the truth, and the truth, the verse promises, is where the whole thing begins. So tonight, if you are lying here, aware of something you have not been looking at, something you have been walling off, something you have told yourself is fine when you know, in the quiet part of you that cannot be fooled, that it is not fine. The verse has something to say to you. It says your awareness of the thing is not your failure. It is your beginning. It is the crack in the wall. And the crack, the verse says, is where the light comes in. You do not have to do anything about it tonight. You do not have to fix it or solve it or make a plan. You only have to know it is there. To feel the stone in the pocket. To notice the crack. That is enough. That is, the Buddha says, where wisdom begins. Not at the far end of a long road here. In the dark, in the knowing. In the small, quiet, honest recognition that we do not see as clearly as we thought. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice what has arrived, if anything has arrived. Notice it the way you would notice a guest at the door, without rushing to let them in or rushing to send them away. Just noticing when you are ready. We will continue together. There is a pair of verses in this chapter that the Buddha placed side by side, the way a painter might place two panels of the same painting next to each other on a wall. Separately, each one says something worth hearing. Together they say everything. The first verse says this: though all his life a fool may sit beside a wise man, he understands the teaching no better than a spoon understands the taste of the soup. And the second, though only for a moment, a discerning person sits with a wise man, he quickly understands the teaching, just as the tongue tastes the flavor of the soup. A spoon and a tongue. This is one of the most famous images in all of Buddhist literature. It has been taught in monasteries and painted on temple walls and whispered by teachers to students for 25 centuries. And the reason it has survived this long is very simple. It is true. It is true in a way that anyone who has ever sat in a classroom and learned nothing, or walked through a garden and learned everything, will immediately recognize the spoon sits in the soup. Let us start there. The spoon is physically inside the soup. It is surrounded by the soup on every side. The soup touches every surface of the spoon. If you asked the spoon whether it had been in contact with the soup, the spoon could truthfully say, yes, I was there. I was in it. I was present. The soup was all around me. I spent my entire life in the bowl, but the spoon has never tasted the soup. Not once, not in all the years of sitting in all the bowls of all the soups in the world. It has been present to the soup without ever receiving the soup. Because the spoon has no receptors, no openness, no capacity to let the thing it is touching actually enter it. The spoon is made of metal or wood or plastic, and its surface is sealed. The soup gives itself freely, generously with everything it has. The spoon takes nothing. The tongue is different. The tongue touches the soup once. One contact, one moment. And in that single moment of contact, the tongue knows everything the soup has to offer. The warmth, the salt, the depth, the way the flavors move from the front of the mouth to the back, the care of the person who made it, the history of the ingredients. All of this arrives in a single moment, not because the tongue is trying harder than the spoon, not because the tongue is smarter or more spiritual or more dedicated, because the tongue is open. It has receptors. It has the capacity to let the world in. The Buddha looked at these two ordinary things, things that anyone eating dinner would have in front of them, and he saw one of the deepest truths about how human beings learn and fail to learn. The difference between the fool and the wise person is not knowledge. It is not intelligence. It is not how many years you have spent studying, or how many books you have read, or how many teachings you have attended. The difference is receptivity, the willingness to let the thing you are hearing actually touch you. The willingness to stop being a surface and to become, for just a moment, an opening. There are people who have studied Buddhism for 40 years and who are spoons. They can recite the sutras from memory. They can explain the Four Noble Truths with perfect accuracy. They can debate the finer points of doctrine with anyone in the room and win. They have been in the soup their entire adult lives, and the soup has never entered them. They have remained sealed. They have understood everything and received nothing. And there are people who have never heard of Buddhism, who have never opened a book about meditation, who could not name a single teaching of the Buddha, who have tasted the soup. They tasted it one afternoon, walking home from work, when they noticed the way the evening light fell through the leaves of a tree they had walked past 1,000 times without seeing. They tasted it one morning holding a cup of coffee and suddenly realizing, without knowing why, that this moment, this exact moment, was enough. They tasted it sitting with a friend who was crying and discovering that they did not need to say anything at all. That their presence was the thing, that being there was the whole offering. The soup is everywhere. The teaching is everywhere. The truth about the way things are is not locked in a monastery, or hidden in a book, or available only to people who have done the right amount of practice. It is in the sound of rain on a roof. It is in the weight of a sleeping child in your arms. It is in the breath you just took without thinking about it. The soup is always there. The question the verse is asking is not whether you have found the soup. You are in it. You have always been in it. The question is whether you are a spoon or a tongue. In a monastery on a hill overlooking a wide valley, there were two monks who had entered the practice on the same day. They were young men when they arrived, both about 20 years old, both carrying the same uncertainty, the same quiet hope that the monastic life might give them something the world outside had not. They took their vows on the same morning. They received their robes from the same teacher. They were assigned cushions in the same meditation hall, 3 rows apart, and for the next 20 years, they sat in that hall every morning and every evening, breathing the same air, hearing the same bell, following the same instructions from the same teachers. The first monk took to the practice the way a fish takes to water. Within his first year, his concentration was remarkable. He could sit for hours without moving. His teachers praised him openly, which they rarely did. He memorized the texts quickly and accurately. He could recite long passages from memory and then explain them in his own words with a clarity that impressed even the older monks. By the time he was 30, he was considered one of the most promising practitioners in the monastery. People spoke of him as a future teacher, perhaps a future abbot. His understanding was deep, and his exposition was brilliant, and his discipline was beyond question. The second monk was not like this. He sat in meditation and his legs ached. He tried to follow the breath, and his mind went to the kitchen, to the sound of a bird outside the window, to a memory of his mother cooking rice on a rainy morning when he was 7 years old. He forgot the text almost as quickly as he memorized them. He asked the same questions over and over until the younger monks exchanged glances behind his back. His teachers were patient with him, genuinely kind, but no one expected great things from him. He was simply a man who had come to the monastery because he wanted to learn something, and who sat on his cushion every day because he did not know what else to do. 20 years passed. The seasons turned. The valley below the hill went green and gold and green again 200 times. The first monk became a senior teacher. He lectured. Students came from other provinces to study with him. His explanations of the Dharma were precise and elegant. He could answer any question. He never hesitated. He never said, "I do not know." But there was something about him that the oldest monks in the monastery, the ones who had been practicing for 50 and 60 years, quietly noticed. His answers were always correct, but they were never surprising. His understanding was deep in the way that a well is deep, straight and narrow and exact. But there was nothing in the well that he had not put there himself. He had studied the soup. He had analyzed the soup. He could describe the soup's ingredients and its temperature and its history and its nutritional value. But he had never tasted it. The second monk, after 20 years, was still not impressive by any external measure. He still could not lecture. He still forgot passages he had studied the week before. He still asked questions that made the younger monks look at each other. But there was something about him that the same old monks noticed. Something they could not teach and could not explain and could not produce by any method known to the tradition. When the second monk spoke, which was not often, what he said came from a different place. Not from the texts, not from analysis. From somewhere underneath. From a place that had been worn smooth by 20 years of sitting with a mind that would not cooperate, in a body that ached, in a practice that never became easy or impressive or anything other than what it was. One afternoon, a visitor came to the monastery. He was a farmer from the valley. His wife had died suddenly, 3 days earlier. He had small children at home. He was in the kind of grief that does not know where to put itself, the kind that walks into a room and stands in the middle and does not know which direction to face. He had come up the hill because he did not know where else to go. The abbot directed the farmer to the first monk, the senior teacher, the brilliant one. The farmer sat with him in a small room. The first monk was kind. He spoke about impermanence. He spoke about the nature of attachment. He quoted the teachings on loss with accuracy and compassion. He said the right things in the right order. He meant every word. The farmer listened. He nodded. He was polite. When the monk finished speaking, the farmer thanked him and stood up to leave. But at the doorway he paused. He turned back. His face had not changed since he arrived. The grief was exactly where it had been when he walked in. "I believe everything you have said," the farmer said. "I believe it is all true." The first monk did not know what to say to this. He had given the best he had. The farmer walked back across the courtyard toward the gate. He was going to go home. He was going to go home and sit in the kitchen where his wife had sat, and he was going to do what he had been doing for 3 days, which was to try to remember how to breathe in a house that no longer had her in it. But as he crossed the courtyard, he passed the second monk, who was sweeping the stone path between the meditation hall and the garden. The second monk looked up. He saw the farmer's face. He stopped sweeping. He set the broom against the wall. They stood there for a moment. The monk and the farmer. In the courtyard. In the afternoon light, the second monk did not quote any teaching. He did not explain impermanence. He did not offer the correct words in the correct order. He simply looked at the farmer. And then he said 2 words, "I know," and then he stood there. He did not say anything else. He did not move. He did not look away. He did not try to fix anything or explain anything or make anything better. He simply stood in the courtyard with the farmer and let the farmer's grief be what it was. He did not try to make it smaller or more manageable or more acceptable. He let it be enormous. He let it fill the courtyard. The farmer wept. He had not wept yet. Not since his wife died. He had been too stunned, too busy with the children, too surrounded by relatives who wanted to help, by making food and washing clothes and doing all the practical things that need doing when someone dies. He had not found a single moment in 3 days where he could simply stand still and feel what he was feeling without someone trying to take it from him. The second monk was that moment. They stood in the courtyard for a long time. The sun moved, the shadows changed. The sweeping was not finished. It did not matter. Eventually the farmer wiped his face with his hands. He looked at the monk. He did not need to say anything. But he said it anyway. "Thank you." The monk nodded once. He picked up his broom. He went back to sweeping. The farmer walked down the hill. He was not healed. He would not be healed for a long time. But something had reached him in the courtyard that had not reached him in the teaching room. Something that did not need words. Something that came not from understanding, but from presence. Not from the spoon, but from the tongue. The first monk had been in the soup for 20 years. He knew everything about the soup. He could describe it in languages the soup had never heard of. But he had never tasted it. And when the moment came, when the soup was needed, when a man stood in a courtyard with nothing left in him except grief, the first monk could only offer descriptions. The second monk could not describe anything about the soup. He could not have passed an exam about it. He could not have given a lecture. But when the moment came, he tasted it, and what he tasted, he could offer not in words, in presence, in the simple act of standing still, of setting down the broom, of saying "I know" and meaning it from a place so deep that the words barely mattered. What mattered was the place they came from. And that place was the tongue. This is what the verse is teaching. Not that knowledge is bad. Knowledge is good. The first monk's teaching was accurate and kind. But accuracy is not the same as contact. Correctness is not the same as connection. The farmer needed someone who could touch him where he was actually hurting, not where the text said he should be hurting. And that kind of touching requires not knowledge but openness. Not the spoon but the tongue. Tonight, you do not need to understand anything. You do not need to take notes. You do not need to remember any verse or any story or any word. The soup is here. The teaching is here. The night is here. Your only work, if it can even be called work, is to be here with it, to lie in the dark and to let whatever touches you touch you. To stop trying so hard to understand and to simply listen. To stop reaching for insight and to simply be present. The tongue does not try to taste the soup. The tongue simply touches it. And what happens next is not effort. It is not achievement. It is reception. It is the oldest and simplest thing in the world. The willingness to be where you are and to let what is here reach you. If nothing reaches you tonight, that is all right. The spoon was in the soup. The soup was around the spoon. Nothing was lost. The soup is patient. It will be here tomorrow, and the night after that, and the night after that. And on some night you cannot yet see, the tongue will be ready. It works on its own schedule. It does not answer to effort, and if something has already reached you tonight, even once, even briefly, even a single phrase that made something shift in the chest. Then the verse has done its work. The tongue has tasted the soup, and what has been tasted cannot be untasted. It is in you now, it will stay. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the body. Notice what the body knows, that the mind has not yet caught up to. The body is often ahead of us in these matters. It knows before we do when something has landed. When you are ready, we will continue together. We come now to one of the most uncomfortable verses in this chapter. I say uncomfortable not because it is harsh. The Buddha was never harsh. I say uncomfortable because it is honest in a way that most of us spend our lives avoiding. And the night, with its quiet and its dark and its absence of distraction, is the place where this particular honesty finds us most easily. The verse goes like this. Fools of little wit are enemies unto themselves, as they move about doing evil deeds, the fruits of which are bitter. Enemies unto themselves, not enemies of the world, not enemies of other people, enemies of themselves. The Buddha is not talking about criminals. He is not talking about people who do terrible things to other people. He is talking about something much more ordinary, much more common, much closer to the person lying in this bed right now listening to these words. He is talking about the way we sabotage ourselves, the way we choose, again and again, with a consistency that would be impressive if it were not so painful. The thing that hurts us. We know the thing. We always know the thing. We know when we pick up the phone at midnight that checking whether they have replied will not bring peace. It will bring the opposite of peace. It will bring either the anxiety of no reply or the anxiety of passing whatever the reply actually means. We know this, and we pick up the phone anyway. We know when we start replaying the argument for the 14th time that the replaying will not resolve anything. It will not produce the perfect response we did not give at the time. It will not change what was said. It will only keep the wound open for another hour. We know this, and we replay it anyway. We know when we start the internal accounting, the nightly audit of everything we did wrong today, every place we fell short, every word we should not have said, every opportunity we should not have missed. We know that this accounting will not improve tomorrow. It will only exhaust tonight. We know this, and we do the accounting anyway. The verse calls these things evil deeds. But the word evil in this context is not the evil of villains and monsters. The Pali word is closer to unskillful. Deeds that do not serve us. Deeds that produce bitter fruit. Actions we take against ourselves, in the privacy of our own mind, that nobody else can see and nobody else can stop, because we are the only ones in the room. And there is another verse, just a few lines later in the same chapter, that makes this even more precise. It says, as long as the evil deed has not ripened, the fool mistakes it for honey. But when the evil deed ripens, the fool comes to grief. The fool mistakes it for honey. This is one of the most psychologically accurate things the Buddha ever said. Because the reaching for the phone at midnight does feel like something sweet. It feels like connection, like checking in. Like caring. The replaying of the argument does feel productive. It feels like we are working something out, getting closer to resolution. The nightly accounting does feel responsible. It feels like self-improvement, like holding ourselves to high standards, like the kind of thing a serious person would do. These are the honey moments, the moments before the fruit ripens, and they taste sweet. They always taste sweet. That is why we keep reaching for them. That is why the hand goes to the phone, and the mind goes to the argument, and the inner judge takes the bench night after night after night. Because in the moment, each one of these things offers something that feels like nourishment. But then the fruit ripens. The phone check has stolen 20 minutes and delivered nothing but a tighter chest. The replaying has kept you awake until 2 in the morning. And the argument is exactly where it was when you started. The accounting has produced a verdict, as it always does, that you are not enough, and you will carry that verdict into tomorrow where it will make you smaller and more careful and less willing to try things and less able to enjoy the things you do try. The fruit, when it arrives, is always bitter. The verse is not blaming us for this. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand. The Buddha is not standing over us with a pointed finger, saying, "You brought this on yourself." He is sitting beside us with a gentle hand saying, "I see what is happening. I have watched minds do this for a very long time. I know how the honey turns to bitterness. I know the hand that reaches. And I am telling you, as someone who has been where you are, that the hand that reaches for the thing can also be the hand that lets it go." In a seaside town where the salt air came in through every window and left a thin white crust on the shutters, there lived a woman who made pottery. She had a small workshop behind her house, with a single wheel and a kiln. She had built herself from stones gathered on the beach over the course of a summer. Her pots were not fancy. They were simple, practical things. Bowls for soup, cups for tea, jars for storing rice and salt, and the dried herbs she grew in the small garden beside the kiln. The people in her town used her pots every day. They did not think much about who had made them. They were just pots. They held things. That was enough. The woman was good at her work. Her hands knew the clay the way an old friend knows your face. She could center a lump on the wheel in a few seconds, something that takes most potters years to learn. She could pull a wall up thin and even without measuring, guided by nothing but the pressure of her fingertips and 30 years of practice. The work itself gave her a kind of peace that nothing else in her life quite matched. When her hands were in the clay and the wheel was turning, and the shape was emerging from the formless lump, she was not worried. She was not planning. She was not grading herself. She was just here, in the work, in the clay, in the quiet rhythm of the wheel. But the woman had a habit that lived outside the workshop, a habit that waited for her every evening, patient and familiar, the way a dog waits by the door. It was not a habit anyone else could see. It lived entirely inside her, in the most private rooms of her mind, and it had been with her for as long as she could remember. Every evening after the workshop was closed, and the kiln was cooling, and the day's pots were drying on the shelf, the woman would sit in her kitchen and begin the accounting. Not the accounting of money or inventory, or the practical business of a pottery shop. The accounting of herself. She would go through the day the way a judge goes through a case file. She would examine every conversation she had had. She would weigh every word she had spoken. She would locate, with the precision of someone who has been doing this for 30 years, the exact places where she had said the wrong thing, or said the right thing in the wrong tone, or failed to say anything at all when something needed to be said. She would find the moments where she had been impatient with a customer, or distracted when a friend was talking, or careless with someone's feelings in a way she had not noticed at the time. But that came back to her now, in the quiet kitchen, with the clarity of a bell. This took about an hour, sometimes longer, on the bad evenings. By the time she went to bed, the day had been thoroughly prosecuted. The evidence had been examined. The verdict had been delivered. And the verdict was always the same. She had not been good enough. She had not been kind enough. She had not been careful enough. She had not been enough. She had been doing this for 30 years. Longer than she had been making pots. One afternoon, a girl from the town came to watch her work. The girl was 12 years old and curious about everything, and she had always wanted to see how pots were made. She sat on a wooden stool in the corner of the workshop, her legs swinging, her eyes wide, watching as the woman worked the wheel. The woman pulled a bowl from the clay. It was a good bowl. Even she could see that, and she was not in the habit of seeing her own work kindly. The walls were even. The curve was gentle and true. The lip was clean and smooth, but then as she was finishing, her thumbs slipped. A small dent appeared near the rim, barely visible, a tiny imperfection in an otherwise graceful form. The woman stopped the wheel. She looked at the dent. She could fix it. It would take 10 seconds. A slight press, a gentle smoothing, and the dent would be gone, as if it had never existed. Instead, she collapsed the bowl back into a lump of clay. She pressed it flat with both palms. She began again. The girl watched this happen. She did not say anything at the time. She sat on her stool and watched the woman start over, and she thought about the bowl she had just seen destroyed. And she thought it had been beautiful, dent and all, and she did not understand why it had to die. Later, as the woman was cleaning up for the day, washing the clay from her hands in a bucket of cool water, the girl asked, "Why did you destroy that bowl?" "It had a flaw," the woman said. "I could not see any flaw. It was near the rim, a small dent. Could you not have fixed it?" "Perhaps, but it would not have been right." The girl thought about this. She kicked her legs against the stool. Then she said something that the woman did not expect, and that the woman, for the rest of her life, would never forget. "My grandmother has a bowl from you," the girl said. "She has had it for many years. It has a small chip on the edge." She pointed to the rim of an imaginary bowl. "She says it is her favorite bowl because the chip is where she holds it." The woman stood very still in her workshop. The water dripped from her hands into the bucket. She had a strange sensation, as if a small door she had not known existed had just opened somewhere behind her ribs. That night, for the first time in many years, the woman tried something different. She sat in her kitchen as usual. The accounting began as usual. The judge took her seat. The evidence was presented. The first floor of the day was located and held up to the light. A moment at the market where she had been short with a customer who was taking too long to decide. But this time, instead of examining the floor from every angle, instead of weighing it and measuring it and adding it to the long list of things she had done wrong, the woman thought of the girl's grandmother. She thought of the old woman holding her favorite bowl by its chip, holding it exactly where it was broken, calling it her favorite because of the flaw, not despite it. She did not know what to do with this thought. She could not turn it into a technique. She could not make it into a method for silencing the judge. The thought was not a tool. It was something else. It was warm and it was true. And it sat in the room with her the way a candle sits in a room. Not doing anything. Just being there. Just giving off a small steady light. And the judge, for just a moment, lost her train of thought. The prosecution, for just a moment, stalled. The woman went to bed that night slightly earlier than usual. The trial had been shorter, not because she had stopped it, because it had run out of steam. Something had interrupted the machinery, something small and warm and shaped like a 12-year-old girl, saying, "My grandmother holds the bowl where it is chipped." In the morning, the workshop opened as usual. The wheel turned as usual. But there was a bowl on the shelf that the woman had not destroyed. It had a small dent near the rim, a dent from where a thumb had slipped, and she had left it there. She had smoothed the dent just a little, just enough to keep it from being sharp, and then she had set the bowl on the shelf with the others. It was, she thought, perhaps the most honest bowl she had ever made. The woman had been her own enemy for 30 years. Not dramatically. Not in any way that anyone else could see. Quietly, privately. In the kitchen after the workshop closed. Every evening she had been doing to herself what the verse describes. She had been producing bitter fruit, not the bitterness of external failure, the bitterness of exhaustion, of sadness, of the slow erosion of a person's ability to see herself clearly, to see herself kindly, to see herself at all as anything other than a collection of flaws held up to an unforgiving light. 30 years of nightly prosecution had not made her a better person. It had made her a tired one. A smaller one, a person who destroyed beautiful bowls because of dents that a grandmother would have loved. This is what the verse means by enemies unto themselves. It does not mean we are destroying our lives in obvious, dramatic ways. It means we are wearing ourselves down in invisible ones. The ways that happen after the workshop closes. The ways that happen in bed after the lights are off. The small daily, Private acts of unkindness toward ourselves that accumulate over years and decades, until we are carrying a weight so familiar we have forgotten it is there. And the girl's grandmother knew something the woman had not yet learned. That the chip in the bowl is not a flaw to be prosecuted. It is the place where the thumb fits. It is the place where the hand holds on. The imperfection is what makes the bowl usable, lovable, human. In a monastery that had stood for 300 years on the side of a mountain, where the clouds came through the windows in the mornings, there lived an old monk who had been practicing for nearly 40 years. He was known throughout the monastery for his kindness. When younger monks struggled with doubt or loneliness, or the particular difficulty of sitting still with a restless mind, they came to him. When visitors climbed the mountain with heavy hearts, he was the one who sat with them. He had a way of listening that made people feel that what they were saying mattered. He had a way of being present that made the room feel like a room you wanted to stay in. But the monk had a secret that he had carried for all of those 40 years. The kindness he gave so freely to others, the patience and the gentleness and the steady warmth, he could not give to himself. Every evening after the day's work was done, after the visitors had gone home, after the younger monks had gone to bed, and the monastery was quiet and the mountain was dark, and there was no one left to be kind to, a different voice took over inside him. A voice that was not kind at all. The voice told him he was a fraud. That after 40 years of practice, he should have gotten further than this. That his meditation was shallow. That his understanding was narrow. That the kindness he showed to others was a performance, a mask over a man who was still, at his core, the same frightened boy who had walked through the monastery gates 4 decades ago, with nothing but a blanket and a bowl. The voice had been there his entire life, longer than the practice, longer than the monastery, longer than any teaching he had ever heard. It was the oldest voice he knew, and because it was the oldest, it was the one he trusted most. Even though it had never once been kind to him, even though in 40 years, it had never once said you are enough. One evening, very late, a young monk of perhaps 19 came to see him. The boy had been crying. His eyes were red. His robes were wrinkled. He sat down across from the old man and he said, in a voice so quiet it was barely there, "I am not good enough for this life, I should leave." The old monk looked at the young man's face, and what he saw there hit him like cold water in the chest. He saw his own face, not the face he wore in the daylight, the face of the kind teacher, the steady presence. He saw the face underneath, the face that came out at night, the frightened face, the face that said, "I am not enough." He reached across the space between them and placed his hand on the young monk's shoulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "The voice you are hearing right now, the one that says you are not good enough, is not the truth. It is a habit. It is something that was given to you by someone who did not know they were giving it. A parent, a teacher, a schoolyard, a culture, someone, somewhere, long before you had any say in the matter, planted this voice in you. And you have carried it so long you think it is yours. But it is not yours." The young monk looked up. The old monk smiled. It was a sad, honest, beautiful smile. The smile of a man who is telling the truth for the first time in a very long time. "Because I hear the same voice," he said. "I have heard it every night for 40 years. It is the last thing I hear before I fall asleep, and the first thing I hear when I wake up. I have listened to it longer than I have listened to any teaching the Buddha ever gave. And I am telling you now, from the far end of a long life, that it has never once spoken the truth, not once." The young monk stared. Every night after you and the others have gone to bed, and the monastery is quiet, and there is no one left to be kind to but myself, the voice comes. "Then how do you keep going?" The old monk was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the trees on the mountain. Somewhere far below, a stream ran over stones in the dark. "I keep going," he said, "because I have finally, very late in life, begun to understand something. The voice is not me. It lives in me, it uses my language. It speaks with my mouth. But it is not me. It is a guest who arrived a very long time ago and who has overstayed. They sat together for a long time after that. The old monk and the young one. Neither of them spoke again. The monastery was dark. The mountain was dark. The world was quiet. And in that room, two men who had both been their own worst enemies sat together in the dark. And the sitting together was itself a kindness that neither of them could have offered alone. Tonight, if the voice arrives, the one that runs the nightly court, the one that knows exactly where you fell short today, the one that has been with you longer than any friendship or any love, you can try something the old monk learned. You do not have to silence it. You do not have to argue with it. You do not have to prove it wrong. You can simply notice it. Ah, there you are. I know you have been here a very long time. But you are not me. You are a guest. You arrived before I was old enough to turn you away. You speak with my voice, but you do not speak for me. And tonight I am not going to offer you tea. You can sit in the corner if you must. I cannot make you leave. But I am going to lie here and breathe and let the night be what the night is. And in the morning, when you are still here, because you always are, I will deal with you then. That is enough. That is more than enough. The verse does not ask us to defeat the enemy inside. It asks us to see the enemy clearly enough to stop feeding it. And seeing clearly, in the dark, in the quiet, is sometimes the only tool we have. But the Buddha says it is the only tool we need. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. If the voice has been speaking tonight, let it know it has been heard. And then let it know that the court is adjourned. Not forever, just for tonight. The trial can resume in the morning, if it must. But right now the judge is tired, the defendant is tired. And the night has better things to offer both of them than another verdict. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have crossed now from one chapter into the next, from the chapter on fools into the chapter on the wise, and the crossing happens without ceremony. There is no line drawn in the text. There is no announcement. The Dhammapada simply turns the page and begins again, as if to say the distance between foolishness and wisdom is not a journey across a continent. It is a single step, a turning A shift in the direction you are facing. And the first thing the chapter on the wise says is not what you might expect. It does not begin with meditation, or with enlightenment, or with the mastery of the mind. It begins with something much more ordinary. It begins with friendship, with the question of who you allow to stand close to you, and what you let them say. The verse goes like this. Should you find someone who points out your faults and who corrects you, follow that person as you would follow a guide to hidden treasure. It is always better, and never worse, to cultivate such an association. And then a verse later. Do not associate with bad friends. Do not seek the fellowship of the vile. Associate with good friends. Seek the fellowship of noble people. The Buddha, beginning his chapter on wisdom, does not talk about what the wise person thinks or knows or believes. He talks about who the wise person stands beside. He talks about the company they keep. And the first quality he names in the company worth keeping is startling. He says, look for the person who points out your faults, not the person who agrees with you. Not the person who tells you what you want to hear. Not the person who makes you feel comfortable and confirmed and certain that you are right. The person who points out your faults. The person who sees where you are crooked and says so. The person most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. And then the verse uses a remarkable image. It says, follow that person as you would follow a guide to hidden treasure. Hidden treasure. The person who tells you what is wrong with you is not your enemy. That person is a guide. And the faults they point out are not wounds they are inflicting. They are locations on a map. They are markers that say, dig here. Something valuable is buried under this thing you have been avoiding. This habit you have not examined. This story you have been telling yourself about yourself that is not quite true. This is one of the great reversals in the Dhammapada. The fool surrounds himself with people who agree with him. The wise person seeks out the one who will not. The fool builds walls. The wise person builds doors. The fool hears criticism and reaches for his armor. The wise person hears criticism and reaches for a shovel. Most of us resist this. We resist it because we have all had the experience of hearing something true about ourselves that hurt. Something that landed in a place we were not ready to have touched. Something that made us defensive, made the chest tighten, made us want to argue or explain or walk away. We have all been in the moment when someone we trusted said something about us that we did not want to hear, and our first response was not gratitude but anger. The Buddha knows this. He is not pretending that hearing the truth about yourself is pleasant. He is saying it is valuable. He is saying it is treasure. And treasure, as anyone who has ever looked for it knows, is not found on the surface. It is found underground in the dark, in the places where no one has been digging. The places we have been avoiding precisely because we sense that something is buried there. Something we do not want to see. Something that once seen will require us to change. There was a man who had been married for 22 years. His marriage was not bad. He would have told anyone who asked that it was a good marriage. Solid, reliable, the kind of marriage that lasts because both people have decided it will last and have done the daily work of making that decision real. He came home from work each evening. His wife prepared dinner. They ate together, usually with the television on, usually talking about practical things. The car needed new tires. The water bill was higher than last month. Their daughter's school was holding a meeting next Tuesday that one of them should probably attend. They did not talk about much else. They had stopped talking about much else a long time ago, so long ago that neither of them could remember exactly when it happened or what the conversations had been like before the change. It had not been a sudden stopping. It had been a slow narrowing, the way a river narrows when the banks creep inward year by year. The river is still flowing. The water is still there. But the channel has become so narrow that only the smallest things can pass through it. The big things, the deep things, the things that matter most, they no longer fit. The man was not unhappy. He was not happy either. He lived in the middle place. The place of not quite. The place where nothing is wrong enough to demand action, and nothing is right enough to produce joy. He had grown comfortable in that place the way you grow comfortable in a chair that does not fit your body, but that you have been sitting in for so long your body has shaped itself to it. One evening, a Tuesday, nothing special about it. His wife set down her fork and said something she had never said before. "I do not think you see me anymore." The man looked up from his plate. He did not understand. He said, "I see you every day." "That is not what I mean." She said. She was very calm. She was not angry. She was not starting a fight. She was saying something she had been carrying for a long time, and the carrying had worn the words smooth and quiet. "You look at me," she said, "but you do not see me. You see the person who cooks dinner and pays half the bills, and remembers the dentist appointments, and keeps the house running. You see the person who is here, but you do not see me." The man felt something rise in his chest. He recognized it immediately. It was the armor, the defensiveness, the familiar machinery that he had used his whole adult life to deflect anything that might require him to change. He could feel the words forming. "I have been a good husband. I have provided. I have been faithful. I have stayed." But something stopped him. Something in her face. She was not accusing him. She was not attacking. She was sad deeply, quietly, enormously sad. And the sadness was not about the dishes, or the bills, or the television, or any of the practical things they had been talking about for 22 years. The sadness was about something underneath all of that. Something he had not been looking at. something he had been walking past every day, the way you walk past a painting on a wall until you no longer see it. He did not deploy the armor. He did not know why. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps the sadness in her face was too large to argue with. Perhaps after 22 years of the middle place, something in him was ready to hear what she was saying, even though it hurt, even though it meant that the story he had been telling himself about his marriage, the story in which everything was fine, was not the whole story. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him for a long time. And then she told him. She told him quietly, without accusation, with the exhausted honesty of a person who has been holding something for too long and has finally decided to set it down regardless of where it lands. She told him that he had stopped asking her questions, that somewhere around year 7 or 8, he had stopped being curious about her inner life. She told him that he came home and sat down and ate and watched the television and went to bed, and that the whole evening passed, every evening without him, once wondering what she had been thinking about that day, what she had been feeling, what she had been carrying. She told him she had tried to bring this up before, several times over the years, and that each time she had started, he had steered the conversation back to something practical, something safe, something that did not require him to feel anything, or to look at anything, or to change anything about the comfortable chair he had shaped himself into. She told him she loved him, that she had always loved him, that the love was not the question. The love was there every morning and every evening, and in every meal she made and every shirt she folded, and every night she lay beside him in the dark. The love was not the problem. The problem was that the love had nowhere to go. It sat between them like a guest no one acknowledged. It was there at every meal. It was there in every silence. But no one ever turned to it and said, "Come in. Sit down, tell us what you need." The man sat at the table for a long time after she finished speaking. The food was cold. The television was off. He had turned it off while she was talking. That small action, reaching for the remote and pressing the button and letting the silence fill the room, was itself a kind of turning, a small door opening. He did not fix everything that night. He did not become a different husband by morning. But something had shifted. Some wall, some smooth, polished surface that had been keeping everything out for 22 years, had developed a crack, and through the crack, something came in that had been standing outside the door for a very long time, waiting to be invited. His wife was not his enemy. She was his guide to hidden treasure. And the treasure she was pointing to was not buried in some distant field. It was right there. It had always been right there. It was her. It was the person sitting across from him at dinner every night for 22 years. The person he had stopped seeing. The person who was still real, still deep, still full of things he had never asked about. The treasure was the marriage itself. The parts of it he had not been digging in. The parts that had been waiting, patient as dirt, for someone to pick up a shovel. The verse says it is always better, and never worse, to hear the truth about yourself. The man at the dinner table would not have said it felt better. It felt terrible. It felt like being opened. But better and pleasant are not the same thing. The surgery that saves your life is not pleasant. The conversation that saves your marriage is not pleasant. The moment when you finally look at the thing you have been avoiding for 22 years is not pleasant. But it is better. It is always better, because the alternative is the middle place, the not quite place, the comfortable chair that does not fit, the river that has narrowed until only the smallest things can pass through. And that place, for all its comfort, is a kind of death, a slow, painless, unnoticed death of everything that matters most. Tonight the verse does not ask you to go looking for someone who will point out your faults. It does not ask you to call someone up and say, "Tell me what is wrong with me." It asks something smaller. It asks you to consider the possibility that the person who has told you the hardest thing, the thing you least wanted to hear, the thing you spent the most energy defending against, may have been pointing at treasure, not at your weakness, at your wealth, at the place where the gold is buried, at the thing that, once you dig it up, will make you richer than you have ever been. And if that person is no longer in your life, if the guide has moved on, if the conversation was years ago, and you have been carrying your defense against it ever since, the verse suggests that you can still dig. The map is still there. The treasure has not moved. The faults they pointed at are still faults, and the gold beneath them is still gold. You can start digging anytime. Even tonight, even lying in the dark with nothing but a memory and a willingness to see it differently. There is another story about this kind of guide. Not a husband and wife this time. A father and a daughter. The daughter was perhaps 30 years old. She had moved to a city far from the village where she grew up. She had a career she was proud of. She had built a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly the kind of life she had set out to build. She called her father every Sunday. The calls were pleasant. They talked about the weather in the village, and the weather in the city, and the price of things, and the health of relatives. They did not talk about anything underneath. One Sunday the father said something different. The daughter laughed. "No," he said, "I have been thinking about you. About who you are becoming." The daughter felt the familiar tightening, the armor beginning to assemble itself. She almost said, "Let us talk about it another time." She almost changed the subject to something safe, but something in her father's voice, a quietness that she had not heard before, a heaviness that sounded like it had been carried for a long time, made her wait. "Say it," she said. Her father was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing. She could hear faintly the sound of the village behind him. A rooster, a distant motorbike. "You have built a very good life," he said. "You work hard. You have done everything you said you would do. Your mother and I are proud of you. But I notice something in your voice when you call. I have noticed it for a long time. You are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. You are busy in a way that has nothing to do with the work." The daughter did not say anything. Her throat had closed. "When you were a girl," her father said, "you used to sit under the neem tree in the yard and do nothing. You would sit there for an hour, just sitting. Your mother used to worry about it. She would say, 'What is wrong with her? Why does she not play? Why does she just sit there?' But I knew there was nothing wrong. You were just being with yourself. You were good company for yourself." He paused. "I do not think you know how to do that anymore. I think you have filled your life so full of doing that there is no room left for being. And I think the tiredness in your voice is not from the doing." The daughter wept. She wept on the phone in her apartment in the city, thousands of miles from the neem tree in the yard, thousands of miles from the girl who used to sit under it and do nothing and be perfectly content. She wept because her father had said something that she had known for years, that she had been avoiding for years, that she had been running from for years. And he had said it not to hurt her, but to love her. He had pointed at the treasure she had buried under a career and a schedule, and a life so full of motion that she never had to stand still long enough to feel what she was feeling. She did not quit her job the next morning. She did not move back to the village. She did not make any dramatic changes. But she started, very slowly, to sit, not under a neem tree, on the small balcony of her apartment, in the evenings. After work she sat there for 5 minutes at first, then 10, then longer. She did not do anything. She just sat, and something in her, something that had been holding its breath for years, began very slowly to exhale. Her father had been her guide to hidden treasure. And the treasure was not a new life or a new career or a new anything. The treasure was the girl under the tree. The girl who knew how to be still. The girl who had been buried under years of doing, but who had never actually left, who had been waiting. Patient as treasure always waits for someone to point at the ground and say, "Dig here. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath." If someone has told you something hard, and you have been carrying your reaction to it for a long time, you can set the reaction down tonight. not the truth they told you. Keep that, but the armor you put on in response, the defense, the argument you have been rehearsing. You can set that down. It has been heavy. It has been in the way. When you are ready, we will continue together. The chapter on the wise goes further now. Having told us who the wise person stands beside, it tells us what happens inside the wise person over time. And the images it uses are among the most beautiful in the entire Dhammapada. The first image: he who drinks deep the Dhamma lives happily with a tranquil mind. The wise man ever delights in the Dhamma. And then this line, which I think was written for anyone lying in the dark right now, waiting for sleep. One who drinks the Dhamma sleeps at ease, with clear awareness and calm. Sleeps at ease. The Dhammapada, in a chapter about wisdom, comes back to sleep. As if to say the highest fruit of wisdom is not a certificate on the wall or a title after your name, or the ability to explain complicated things to impressed audiences. The highest fruit of wisdom is this: you can close your eyes at night and actually rest, not because nothing is wrong, not because every problem has been solved, not because the world has become safe and predictable and easy, but because you have stopped fighting yourself. The fool is his own enemy. The wise person has laid down the weapons, and a person who is no longer at war with herself can sleep. Not the sleep of exhaustion, the sleep of falling into bed so tired that consciousness simply gives out. The sleep of ease. The sleep of a person who has set things down, who has let the day go, who has come home to herself and found that home is a place where rest is possible. The second image: irrigators guide the water. Fletchers shape the arrow shaft. Carpenters shape the wood. The wise control themselves. 4 craftsmen, 4 quiet people doing quiet work. The irrigator does not create the water. He guides it. He watches where it flows and where it pools and where the ground is too dry. And he adjusts the channels so that the water reaches where it needs to go. The fletcher does not create the wood. He takes the shaft as it is, bent and imperfect, and he straightens it slowly, over many days with heat and patience, and the knowledge that the wood has its own memory and will return to its old shape if he is not careful. The carpenter does not invent the wood. He shapes what is already there, working with the grain, not against it, knowing that the best work comes not from forcing the material but from listening to it. And the wise person does the same thing with herself. She does not create a new self out of nothing. She does not force herself into a shape she was not made for. She works with what is there. She guides the water. She straightens the shaft. She listens to the grain. The self she becomes is not a different self. It is the same self, more carefully tended, more patiently shaped, more honestly known. And then the Dhammapada gives us 2 images side by side that are, I think, the images meant for the night. The images designed to accompany you into sleep. The first: just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. The second: like a deep lake, clear, unruffled, and calm, so the wise become clear, calm on hearing words of the Dhamma. A rock and a lake. 2 pictures of something unmoved, but they are not the same picture. And the difference between them is the difference between 2 ways of living that look identical from the outside, but are completely different on the inside. The rock is unmoved because it is hard. The storm comes, the wind howls, the rain hammers, and the rock does not budge. This looks like strength. This looks like what we should aspire to. Most of us, when we try to be strong, try to be rocks. We try to harden ourselves. We try to stop caring what people say. We try to build a surface so thick and so smooth that nothing can penetrate it. We clench, we tighten, we endure. The lake is unmoved for a completely different reason. The lake is not hard. The lake is deep. The rain falls into the lake. The wind blows across its surface. Stones are thrown into it. Leaves fall into it. Animals come to drink from its edges. Children splash in the shallows. The lake refuses none of this. It receives everything. Everything that comes to it is taken in. But because the lake is deep, because there is so much water beneath the surface, so much quiet stillness underneath, the disturbances do not reach the bottom. They play on the surface for a moment. Ripples form. The ripples spread outward in concentric circles. And then the circles dissolve. The surface settles. And the depth, the great quiet depth that holds everything up, was never touched. The Buddha places these two images side by side because he wants us to see the difference. The rock survives the storm by refusing to be affected. The lake survives the storm by being deep enough to absorb the effect. The rock says nothing can touch me. The lake says everything touches me, and I have room for all of it. Most of us, when we try to deal with difficult things at night, try to be rocks. We try to harden against the worry. We clench our jaws and tell ourselves not to think about it. We try to build a wall between ourselves and the thoughts. We try to be impervious, and for a few minutes, sometimes it works. The wall holds, the thoughts bounce off, we feel strong, but walls crack. Clenching exhausts. The rock, for all its hardness, is being worn down by every storm. Given enough storms, given enough years, even the rock will be sand. Hardness is not sustainable. It is a temporary strategy that costs more and more to maintain as time goes on. The lake does not have this problem. The lake is not trying to keep anything out. The lake is not clenching. The lake is not spending energy on resistance. The lake is simply deep. And depth, unlike hardness, does not erode, depth grows. Every rain that falls adds to the lake. Every storm that passes leaves the lake deeper than it was before. The very things that wear the rock down build the lake up. This is the wise person the Dhammapada is describing. Not someone hard. Someone deep, not someone who has learned to stop feeling. Someone who feels everything and has grown a capacity to hold it without being capsized. Not the absence of feeling. The abundance of room. In a valley between two mountains, there was once a lake. It had been there for as long as anyone in the villages nearby could remember. Their grandparents had swum in it. Their great-grandparents had fished in it. The water was clear and cold and very deep. No one knew exactly how deep. A boy had once tied stones to a rope and lowered it from a boat, and the rope had run out before the stones touched bottom. The lake received everything the valley sent it. In spring, the snowmelt poured down the mountains in white rushing streams, and the lake took it in without complaint. In summer, the cattle came to drink, and the children came to swim, and the fishermen came to sit in their boats in the early mornings, and the lake held all of them. In autumn, the leaves fell from the trees on the slopes above and covered the surface in red and gold, and the lake wore them like a blanket until the wind blew them to the edges. In winter, the surface froze, and the village children walked on it. And beneath the ice, the water was still there, still deep, still clear, still holding everything it had always held. One year, a terrible storm came through the valley. The wind tore branches from the trees. The rain fell so hard it flattened the crops in the fields. The streams that fed the lake turned to torrents, carrying mud and stones and uprooted bushes. The villagers stayed inside and listened to the wind and worried about their roofs and their animals and their children. When the storm passed, the next morning, the villagers went out to see the damage. The fields were flattened. The roads were washed out in 3 places. 2 houses had lost their roofs. The old bridge at the south end of the valley was gone entirely, carried away in the night. And the lake, the villagers walked down to the lake expecting to find it churned up and muddy and full of debris, the way the streams were, the way the ditches were, the way everything in the valley was. But the lake was clear. The surface was smooth. The water was the same deep cold blue it had always been. An old fisherman, standing on the bank with his hands in his pockets, looked at the lake for a long time. A younger man beside him said what everyone was thinking. "How is it not disturbed?" The old fisherman smiled. "It is deep, he said. The mud sank to the bottom, and the bottom is so far down it does not matter. The lake has room for everything the storm brought. He looked at the young man. That is the difference between a lake and a puddle. He said a puddle has no depth. Every stone thrown into a puddle hits the bottom. Every bit of mud clouds the whole thing. The young man thought about this. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about his own life, which had felt lately like a puddle. Every small difficulty hitting the bottom. Every harsh word from his wife clouding the whole day. Every worry about money stirring up everything else until nothing was clear. He asked. The old fisherman laughed. Rain, he said. Time, patience, the willingness to stay where you are and let the water accumulate. You cannot rush a lake. You cannot decide to be deep and then be deep by Tuesday. In a small house at the edge of a town where the trains passed through twice a day, there lived a woman who had been an anxious sleeper for most of her adult life. She was perhaps 60 years old now. She had been anxious since she was a girl, though she had not known the word for it then. She had known only the feeling of something in her chest that would not settle. The feeling of a mind that kept watch all night like a guard who had forgotten how to go off duty. When she was young, she had fought the anxiety the way you fight an intruder. She had argued with it. She had tried to reason it away. She had told herself that her worries were foolish, that she was being weak, that she should just close her eyes and sleep like a normal person. She had said these things to herself, with a harshness that she would never have used on anyone else. Not on a friend, not on a stranger, not on a child, only on herself. In her 30s and 40s, she had tried other approaches. She had tried breathing exercises. She had tried warm milk and chamomile tea and lavender on the pillow. She had tried counting backward from 1,000. She had tried imagining peaceful scenes, beaches and forests and fields of wildflowers. Some of these helped a little on some nights. None of them changed the underlying weather of her mind. The anxiety was not a storm that came and went. It was the climate. It was the temperature at which her mind operated. And no amount of chamomile was going to change the temperature. But somewhere in her 50s, she had encountered a teaching that had changed something. Not everything, not all at once, but something. She had been reading an old book, a collection of Buddhist sayings that someone had left on a bench at the train station. She had picked it up while waiting for the afternoon train, and had opened it to a random page, and had read the verse about the rock and the lake. She had read it slowly. She had read it twice. And something in the image had stopped her, the way a hand on a shoulder stops you when you are walking past something you need to see. The lake did not resist. That was the part that stopped her. The lake did not resist the rain or the stones or the wind or the mud. The lake received all of it. And the lake was not harmed by any of it. Not because the lake was tough. Because the lake was deep. She had spent her whole life trying to be a rock, trying to harden herself against the anxiety, trying to build a wall thick enough to keep the worry out. And every wall she built eventually cracked. And every time a wall cracked, she felt like a failure. She felt like someone who could not do the one simple thing that everyone else seemed to manage effortlessly: sleep. But the lake did not build walls. The lake had no walls. The lake was open on every side. And the lake slept at ease. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about it on the train. She thought about it at home. She thought about it in bed that night when the anxiety came, as it always came. Like clockwork, like a neighbor who arrives at the same hour every evening and sits in the same chair and says the same things. But this time, instead of fighting the anxiety, instead of trying to push it away or argue it down or build a wall between herself and it, she tried something she had never tried before. She let it in. She let the worry about her health come in, and she felt it and she let it settle. She let the worry about her son come in, and she felt that too, and she let it settle. She let the old familiar worry about whether she was a good person, the worry that had been with her since childhood, come in, and she felt the weight of it, and she let it sink. The sinking was the thing she had not expected. When she stopped fighting the worries, when she stopped trying to keep them on the surface, where she could wrestle with them, they sank. They went down into some part of her she had not known was there. Some quiet place below the noise, and the noise up on the surface grew softer, not gone. Softer the way a sound grows softer when you move further away from it. She did not sleep perfectly that night. She had not expected to, but she slept differently. She slept the way a lake sleeps in winter, with the ice on top and the water still moving underneath, slow and cold and deep. She slept knowing that the worries were there. She did not pretend they were gone. She simply let them be where they were, and she let herself be where she was. And the distance between the two, the depth was enough. In the mornings that followed, and in the months that followed, and in the years that followed, she continued this practice. She did not call it a practice. She did not call it anything. She simply stopped fighting the anxiety at night and started letting it in. Started letting it sink. Started trusting that she was deeper than the worries. That there was room. She was not cured. The anxiety did not go away. The climate did not change. But she was no longer at war with the climate. She was no longer spending every night trying to make it stop raining. She was a lake the rain fell. The rain fell every night, and she held it, and the surface settled, and sleep, which had been her enemy for 40 years, became something closer to a friend. She thought sometimes of the book on the bench at the train station. She thought about whoever had left it there, and whether they knew that by leaving it, they had placed a small stone in the path of a woman who needed to stumble on exactly those words at exactly that moment in her life. She never found out who left the book. It did not matter. The verse had found her. The lake had found her. And she had discovered, late in life but not too late, that she had been deep all along. She had simply been spending all her depth on resistance. And when she stopped resisting, the depth was there, waiting as it had always been. Tonight you may feel more like a puddle than a lake. Every worry hits the bottom. Every thought clouds the whole surface. There is no depth to absorb the impact. Every stone that falls into you shakes the whole of you. That is all right. The Dhammapada does not say the wise person is born a lake. It says the wise become clear, calm become nata. Become. This is a process. It is happening right now. It has been happening every time you chose to listen instead of scroll. Every time you chose to breathe instead of panic. Every time you chose to lie still and let the night be the night instead of fighting it into something it was not. Each of those moments was rain. Each of those moments was water added to the basin. You did not notice it happening because you cannot feel yourself becoming deeper. You can only feel the surface, and the surface is where the storms are, where the ripples are, where all the noise lives. But underneath, in the place where the stones sink and the mud settles, and the old fisherman knows the bottom is too far down to matter, something has been accumulating. Depth room, the quiet capacity to hold what comes without being destroyed by it. You are becoming a lake. You have been becoming one for longer than you know. Every night like this one, every hour spent listening in the dark instead of fighting in the dark, has added to the depth. The puddle is deeper than it was last year. The surface settles faster than it used to. The stones still fall in. They always will. But they sink a little further before they land. And on some night you cannot see from here, the stones will fall and sink, and the surface will ripple once and settle. And you will notice from somewhere deep beneath the surface that the bottom did not shake, that the bottom has not shaken in a long time, that you have become, without knowing exactly when, something that can hold everything the valley sends it. Tonight, a small practice, perhaps the last one, before we begin to bring the night together. Let the thoughts come. Do not resist them. The lake does not resist the rain. Let the worries land on the surface. Let the ripples form. and then simply watch from somewhere underneath as the ripples do what ripples always do, which is dissolve. They always dissolve. They have never once stayed forever. The surface always settles. It has settled after every storm you have ever survived. It will settle tonight. You do not have to push anything away. You do not have to harden against anything. You do not have to be a rock. You only have to be deep enough to hold what comes. And you have always been deeper than you knew. The old fisherman standing on the bank would take one look at you and know it. You are a lake, the storms come and the storms go, and you are still here. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the depth beneath the surface. It is there. It has always been there. The worries are on the surface. They are real and they matter, and they will be attended to. But they are on the surface. You are underneath. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have come to the end of our second journey through the Dhammapada. Tonight we have walked through 2 chapters, the fool and the wise one. We have met a man on a long road who did not know his mind was lost, until an old woman asked him where his feet were. We have met a pickpocket who heard the Buddha teach, and was opened, and a merchant who heard the same teaching, and was not. We have sat in a monastery, and watched 2 monks stand in a courtyard with a grieving farmer, one offering words that were correct, and one offering presence that was true. We have watched a potter destroy a bowl because of a dent a grandmother would have loved. We have listened to an old monk tell a young one that the voice in his head was a guest, not the owner of the house. We have sat at a dinner table while a wife told her husband the hardest and most necessary thing anyone had ever said to him. We have watched a father on a telephone point his daughter toward the girl she used to be. And we have stood on the bank of a lake after a storm and seen the water settle as if nothing had happened. Now at the very end, we are going to return to 3 verses. Not to learn anything new. There is nothing new to learn tonight. Everything has already been said. We are returning the way you return to a house you have been away from for a long time. Not because you have forgotten what it looks like, because you want to see it again with the eyes you have now, which are not the eyes you had when you left. These 3 verses are the spine of everything we have heard tonight. They are the recognition, the method and the promise. And together, held side by side, they are the whole teaching. They are the whole path. They are the whole of what the Dhammapada wanted to give us in these 2 small chapters. The first verse we return to is the one we heard at the very beginning of the night, when the teaching was new and the dark was fresh. Long is the night to the sleepless. Long is the road to the weary. Long is the cycle of suffering to the foolish who do not know the truth. At the beginning of the night, this verse sounded like a description of misery. Long is the night. Long is the road. Long is the suffering. It sounded like the Buddha was naming something heavy and setting it on our chest. But now, having walked through everything we have walked through, the verse sounds different. It sounds like a door. Because the verse does not say the night is always long. It says the night is long to the sleepless. To the ones who have not yet arrived in it. To the ones whose minds are still on the road while their bodies are in the bed. To the ones who are carrying the whole day and yesterday and last month and next year into the dark and wondering why the dark feels crowded. The night is not punishing you. The night is waiting for you. The way a room waits for you to walk into it. The way a bed waits for you to lie down. The way silence waits for you to stop talking. The night has been here the whole time, quiet and dark and perfectly ready for you. And the only thing between you and the rest it offers is the distance between your body, which is here, and your mind, which is somewhere else. When the mind comes home, when it finally stops traveling and arrives where the body already is, the night becomes short. Not because the clock speeds up, because you are no longer fighting the clock. You are no longer somewhere else, you are here. And here is where the night has always been waiting. The second verse we return to is the one that sat at the heart of the chapter on fools. A fool who knows his foolishness is wise, at least to that extent. But a fool who thinks himself wise is a fool indeed. At the beginning of the night, this verse was about two kinds of people: the pickpocket and the merchant, the one who knew and the one who did not. But now at the end it is about us, about the person lying in this bed at this hour, with this mind and this heart and this particular collection of joys and failures and unfinished business. The verse asks one question: do you know, not do you know the teachings? Not do you know the answers? Do you know yourself? Do you know the walls you have built? Do you know the stories you tell about yourself that are not quite true? Do you know the places where you are still asleep? The verse does not ask you to tear the walls down tonight. It does not ask you to rewrite the stories. It asks you to see them, to know they are there. That is all. That is the beginning. And the beginning, the Buddha says, is more than enough, because a fool who knows his foolishness has a crack in his wall. And through the crack, everything that matters can eventually come. You are here, you are listening. You have let the Dhammapada hold up a mirror in the dark, and you have not looked away. That means the crack is there. That means the seeing has already started. And the seeing, once it starts, does not stop. It works on its own. It works while you sleep. It works in the background of ordinary days, the way a river works on a stone, slowly, invisibly, one night at a time. The third verse is the one we heard near the end, the one about the lake. Like a deep lake, clear, unruffled, and calm, so the wise become clear, calm on hearing words of the Dhamma. This verse is no longer a teaching. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop trying to be a rock and to let yourself be water. To stop resisting what comes and to let it in, and to discover that you have room for it. That you have always had room, that the depth you have been looking for is not something you need to build or earn or achieve. It is what accumulates naturally when you stop spending all your energy on walls. Every night you have ever spent listening in the dark, instead of fighting in the dark, has added to the depth. Every moment you have ever brought the mind back to the breath, without punishing it for having wandered, has added to the depth. Every time you have ever let a worry sink, instead of wrestling it on the surface, has added to the depth. You are deeper tonight than you were last year. You are deeper right now than you were 3 hours ago. The water is rising. The bottom is going down, and the storms, when they come, will find that they have more room than they expected. That the surface settles faster. That the bottom, the great quiet bottom, where the old fisherman knows the stones come to rest, is further away than it used to be. These 3 verses, laid alongside each other, are the whole teaching of these 2 chapters. The first says the night is long because you have not yet arrived in it. The second says begin by seeing what you are. The third says you are becoming deeper than you know. Recognition method. Promise 3 stones at the edge of a path. 3 markers pointing the same direction. Toward rest, toward ease. Toward the place where the night is not long and the mind is not an enemy, and the heart, for all its chips and dents, is exactly what it was always meant to be. In a small house in a quiet town, on a winter evening when the light was gone by 5, and the cold pressed against the windows like a hand, an old man sat in his kitchen. He was perhaps 75 years old. He lived alone now. His wife had died some years before, and his children had grown and moved to cities he had never visited and probably never would. The house was the same house he had lived in for 40 years, but it felt different without the other voices in it. The rooms were the same rooms, but they were quieter, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full. Full of all the sounds that used to be there and are not anymore. The old man had been a carpenter his whole working life. He had made things from wood for 50 years. Tables that families ate dinner on. Chairs that grandmothers sat in. Shelves that held the books children read before bed. Window frames that held the glass, that held the light that fell across the floors of houses he would never enter again. He had spent his life making the ordinary things that hold ordinary life together, and he had done it quietly, without recognition, without anyone stopping to think about the hands that had shaped the wood their days rested on. He had learned something in those 50 years that no one had taught him. He had learned patience. He had learned it the way you learn anything worth learning, not from a book, not from a teacher, but from the thing itself. The wood had taught him. It had taught him that you cannot force a shape, that if you push too hard, the grain splits, that if you are too careful, nothing changes, that the work is in the narrow space between pushing and waiting, in the listening, in the willingness to let the wood tell you what it wants to become. He had applied this to his life without knowing he was applying it. When his wife was alive, he had been patient with the difficult days the way he was patient with a piece of knotted oak. When his children were young and impossible, and broke things and said things that hurt, he had been patient with them the way he was patient with green wood that had not dried yet and could not be expected to hold a shape. When life brought him losses, and it had brought him several, he had not fought them. He had not pretended they were not happening. He had found the narrow space between resistance and surrender, and he had stayed there until the shape of the new life revealed itself. Now in his old age, alone in his kitchen, he did what he had done every evening for as long as he could remember. He poured himself a cup of tea. He sat down in his chair, the chair he had made himself 30 years ago, from a single piece of walnut that had taken him 2 months to find and 6 months to dry. He looked out the window at the garden, where nothing was growing because it was winter, and he let the day go. He did not have a name for what he did each evening. He did not think of it as meditation or practice or anything with a title. It was just what he did. The way you wash your hands before dinner. The way you close the door before you go to bed. He sat, he breathed, he let whatever had happened that day, the good parts and the hard parts and the parts that were neither, slide off him the way sawdust slides off a workbench when you brush it with the flat of your hand. He did not hold any of it. He just let it go. The worries came, as they always did. The worry about the roof. The worry about whether his daughter was happy. The worry about his own body, which was slower than it used to be, which ached in places it had not ached before, which reminded him every morning that he was not the man who had built this chair 30 years ago. And the old worry, the one that had been with him longest, longer than any of the others, the quiet, persistent worry that he had not done enough with his life, that he had only made furniture, that the tables and chairs and shelves he had shaped from wood were ordinary things that would be replaced when they broke, and forgotten when they were replaced. He let the worries come. He did not fight them. He did not engage with them. He did not offer them a chair. They came into the kitchen, and they stood there for a while, and they looked at him, and he looked at them, and then, one by one, they left. They always left. In 50 years of worrying, not one worry had ever stayed forever. Not one. They came and they went, and he was still here, in his kitchen, in his chair with his tea. After a while the tea was cold and the kitchen was dark. He had been sitting there for perhaps an hour without noticing the time pass. It had not been a long hour. It had been the kind of hour that happens when you are not measuring, the kind that moves the way water moves, finding its own pace, not rushed by anything, not held back by anything. He stood up, his knees were stiff. He washed the cup and set it upside down on the counter where it always sat. He walked slowly to the bedroom. He turned down the covers. He lay down in the bed that had held him and his wife for many years and that now held only him. He noticed the extra space, as he always did. He noticed the absence, but the noticing had changed over the years. What had once been a knife was now a hand. The absence was still there, but it had softened. It had become a kind of companion. The space where she used to be was not empty. It was full of everything she had been. The patience, the laughter, the way she sang in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening, the way she said his name. He lay in the dark. His mind went on its usual walk. It visited the roof and the daughter and the knee. It visited a morning 40 years ago, when he had delivered a table to a young couple who had just moved into their first house, and the woman had run her hand across the surface and looked up at him and said, "This is beautiful." And he had not known what to say, because the beauty was not something he had added. It was something the wood already had. He had just uncovered it. His mind wandered. He brought it back. His mind wandered again. He brought it back. This was the rhythm of his nights, and had been for as long as he could remember. The going and the returning, the leaving and the coming home. He did not think of it as practice. He did not think of it as anything. It was just what the mind did and what he did in response. The mind left, he brought it back. The way you bring a child back when the child has wandered to the edge of the yard. Without anger, without disappointment. Just the patient hand that says, "Come back. Come here, this is where we are." After a while the mind settled. Not perfectly, not completely. But the visits grew shorter. The roof was still there but quieter. The daughter was still there but further away. The way things grow further away when you are drifting towards sleep. Not gone, just receding, making room for something else. Something underneath. Something that had no name, but that felt like the underside of a lake. Still, dark, deep. Undisturbed by everything that was happening on the surface. He was not a Buddhist. He had never read the Dhammapada. He did not know that the verses we have heard tonight described, with perfect precision, what was happening inside him at this very moment. The long night becoming short, because he was finally in it. The fool who knew his foolishness, who knew the worry about not having done enough, was just a worry and not the truth. The lake that held everything the day had brought and settled and was still. He did not know any of this. He was just an old man in a quiet house on a winter night. A carpenter who had spent his life shaping wood and who had been shaped in turn by the wood. A man who had learned, without knowing he was learning, the same things the Buddha had taught 25 centuries ago to people sitting under trees in a country this old man had never heard of. He fell asleep, not dramatically, not with any sense of achievement or arrival. He fell asleep the way an old man falls asleep on a winter evening, when the house is quiet and the tea is finished and the day has been set down slowly, gently. The way a leaf falls from a branch, when the wind has stopped and there is nothing left to hold it up, and the letting go is not a decision but a release. The night went on without him. The wind moved through the garden. The cold pressed against the windows. And somewhere in the dark, the teaching that the old man had never read continued to be true. The same teaching it had always been. The same 3 verses, the same 3 stones at the edge of the same path. Long is the night. But his night was not long. The fool who knows. And he had known. He had always known. He had never pretended to be wise. He had just made furniture and let the wood teach him what it could, like a deep lake. And he was deep. Not because he had tried to be, because he had spent a lifetime being patient with difficult things. Because he had spent a lifetime bringing the mind back without punishing it for leaving. Because he had spent a lifetime in the narrow space between pushing and waiting. And the space had made him wide and still, and deep enough to hold everything the valley ever sent him. Tonight this story is not special. The old man is no one famous. He has not been enlightened. He has not had a great realization. He has not discovered the secret of the universe. He has simply lived a long and patient life and has arrived, without knowing he was arriving, at the same place the Dhammapada has been pointing to for 25 centuries. The wisdom in these chapters is not new. It was not new when the Buddha spoke it. It is the kind of wisdom that quiet people in every century find their way to on their own. In kitchens, in workshops, in gardens, in beds. In the ordinary hours of ordinary lives, the Dhammapada just says it more plainly than most. It lays the stones in a row. It marks the path. Tonight you have walked the path. You do not have to remember where it goes. The path will remember for you. Tomorrow or next week or in the middle of some difficult moment months from now, one of these verses will rise up in you without your calling it. The spoon and the tongue, the crack in the wall, the pot tipped upside down, the lake that held the storm. They are inside you now. They do not need your effort to stay. They will stay on their own. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now the teaching is finished. The chapters have been walked through. The verses have been said. The stories have been told. What remains is the simplest thing. Simpler than any teaching. Simpler than any verse. The breath, the body, the dark, the bed, the fact that you are here, right now in this particular room, on this particular night, with this particular mind that has carried you through everything you have ever been through, and that is here with you now, not as an enemy, not as a problem, but as the oldest friend you have, the friend who has been with you since the beginning, the friend who will be with you at the end, the friend who is here right now, tired from the day, ready for rest, deserving of the same kindness you would offer to anyone you loved. The night is not long. Not anymore. The night is exactly the right length. The mind has come home. The worries are settling. The surface is growing still. And underneath, in the depth that has been building all this time, there is room. There is room for everything. There is room for the day that was and the day that will be, and the quiet space between them, where nothing needs to happen and nothing needs to be solved and nothing needs to be carried. Rest now. The Dhammapada will be here tomorrow. The path will be here. The verses will be here. And you will be here, one night deeper than you were. One night closer to the lake you are becoming. One night further into the long, slow, patient, beautiful work of learning to be kind to your own mind. Rest. The night is yours. Let it hold you. You have held enough today.